In America, we tend to think that the news is all about us all the time. At some level, you really can't blame us, though. Just turn on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, and all you get these days is endless election coverage with like a tiny bit of national news and maybe a minute an hour on the international front. Occasionally, when something big flares up, the talking heads will focus on Syria or North Korea or Iran for a couple days. But then it's quickly back to the usual grind. Even when something huge like Brexit is happening, we barely talk about it in the US until the very last second, when suddenly every pundit who hasn't mentioned it once in the past year is supposedly an expert. Beyond hearing about terror attacks, we barely even talk about the countries we have the most in common with once the initial response to the attack is over. Has anything happened in the UK since Brexit? What's been happening in France since the Paris attacks? How are the tapas in Spain or the pasta in Italy or the cheese in Denmark? You might know and I might know, but I bet it's from alternative news sources and social media and not from mainstream television. The danger of only hearing about other countries when bad things happen, like terror attacks, riots, and scandals, is that you begin to think that's all that there is to these other places, as well as the citizens that live there themselves. Imagine if other countries only associated Americans with our current election. Many already do, and that is pretty shitty, although possibly warranted. Every country on earth, every single one, has elements in it that are good and that are bad. This doesn't mean that every country or every culture is equal. Obviously, this is not the case, but every country is made up of all sorts of people with all sorts of beliefs. As I've said often on this show, the ultimate minority is the individual. Judging an entire group as a collective will almost always assure you dismiss huge amounts of people who don't fit the stereotype or the narrative. I've said this before and I'll say it again, one of the things that I'm most proud of about the Rubin Report is that our audience is truly worldwide. When we did our fan show a couple months ago, we got messages from people in over 60 countries. We chose people based on their individual attributes, not because we expected them to represent an entire nation. While our mainstream media does a pretty poor job of showing that we have more in common than what separates us, I find that people like you, the ones watching this right now, do an incredibly good job of it. The conversations I see you having in the comment sections right here on Twitter and on Facebook or even on your own YouTube videos are connecting people from all over the world. I see you guys constantly trying to cut through the nonsense and have real conversations and find some common ground. Together is the only way that we'll have a chance to truly be heard. My guest this week is Australian journalist Rita Panahi. Rita grew up in Iran in a Muslim family and emigrated to Australia when she was 6 years old. She's now a fierce defender of Western values and spends much of her time writing about the same issues I talk about on this show. We're going to talk about her childhood in Iran as well as her life in Australia. Is there more to that giant island country than just boomerangs and kangaroos? I suspect there might just be. To prove my earlier point, when was the last time you heard anything in the news about Australia since the terrorist attack in Sydney almost 2 years ago? They had a nationwide election about 2 months ago, but I think I only heard about that because of a random link on Twitter. If you're watching this, you've already shed much of the mainstream nonsense, but our work is still cut out for us. Let's keep talking to interesting people from all over the world, and if you've got suggestions, well, there's a comment section right down below.